And let's say none of that worked, and we didn't have easy access to a lot of Middle East oil. I mean, if you believed in freedom, you still wouldn't worry about it. You say, well, I guess we need an alternative source. If the market were permitted to work, they'd come up with an alternative source. Maybe we'd have electric cars. Maybe we'd have more nuclear power. Something along those lines. But instead, depending on the markets, here we have a new president saying, what we have to do is we have to invest money in alternative fuels just in case the price gets too high. They have no confidence and no faith in freedom. They do not understand how markets work. They don't want them to work. And then that's the reason they're willing to invest all this money and lives. Just think of the lives that have been lost. Not only the lives of Americans. We lost nearly 3,000 on 9/11, but since then we've lost over 5,000 in the Middle East, plus tens of thousands who have been wounded and made sick. At the same time, millions of displaced Arabs and hundreds of thousands killed. And holy man, it just goes on and on. And then people still wonder, oh no, they don't like us because we're free and prosperous. So maybe when we're not so free and not so prosperous, maybe everybody will love us again or something. I don't know what their theory is.
Well, yeah, once we get rid of the Bill of Rights and completely destroy our economy, they'll leave us alone. I guess the real worry then is what happens when the terrorist attacks continue because the foreign policy continues.
Yeah, they don't forget. Americans have still not even learned that we overthrew the government back in '53, or the government of Iran, and they're still annoyed with that. So when we're over there meddling in that area, that brings back memories, but it's just a small percentage of Americans realize that they have been justified in turning against us when we're always meddling in their affairs. So one thing, though, Scott, that I've been encouraged by in this last year or two in talking about this and this foreign policy has been to talk on college campuses, how many young people, are starting to realize it. And we did get a lot of responses. Even today, I had a lot of good responses on the article against the draft. These young people, they know they're not going to get anything out of Social Security, and they see a financial mess. They can't get jobs, and here they're being threatened possibly with a draft or a National Youth Service. And I think a lot of these young people are waking up.
Well, I spoke with William Astori. He's a retired colonel in the U.S. Air Force and a professor, and he was talking about Commander David Petraeus, the head of CENTCOM, and what he likes to talk about, the long war, and the implication being that it seems like Afghanistan may really only be the beginning, that really any country with a stand on the end of it is likely to be occupied by American troops in the coming decades on some kind of permanent basis. I wonder if you can address that and perhaps include in your answer something about the draft and whether you think that, that's the kind of consequence of having foreign policy so expansive even from this point on.
I've heard those talks about the long war, and I think they're anticipating, but the limitation won't be from just changing party leadership, Republican and Democrat, because the policies are the same. So they're going to continue, but what might limit it, like I said before, might be the ability to finance it, just as it became difficult, if not impossible, for the Soviets to do it, and that helped bring them down. But let's say the financial crisis lingers a while longer where the dollar isn't totally destroyed and we are able to pursue this policy for another 10 or 15 years. Yes, I think the likelihood of a draft is going to continue to grow. Obama and Rahm Emanuel, who's an important figure in the presidency in the White House, they believe in the draft. They believe in National Youth Service. And besides, another thing I'm sure you've heard recently is this talk about when you have a difficult economic situation, sometimes war gets you out of these, and it's taught to so often that the Depression never ended until World War II. Almost like, finally got a war going, and that ended it, which is a complete fallacy.
It seems like we'd all be stinking rich right now. We've been at war nonstop for quite a few years here.
And of course, it's the war that has helped bring us to our knees. And that whole argument, one can show it, and I can argue the case even from memory, is that World War II was not much fun. I was born in 35, so I did have a memory of the war. And, boy, there was rationing, and I was in a family of 5 boys, and things weren't all that robust. There were no new cars on the road. People were driving junk cars, and they had a difficult time. The debt, the depression actually ended when the debt was finally liquidated at the end of the war, and there was a lot of consumer demand, and a lot of people came home. So the war didn't end the depression; it was ending the war that ended the depression.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's something that we've talked about on this show a lot. But you're right that it really does seem to be a defining myth, particularly for these economic times. The New York Times wrote just the other day that, and Dr. Paul, pardon me, but really they did with a straight face, that, well, World War II, one of the things that it was really good at was it brought down the unemployment rate.
Yeah, what a way.
Well, and again, with the draft, with conscription.
Yeah, and I think I'd rather live in poor conditions than putting on a uniform and getting shot at, especially for some war. It made no sense.
Well, and what is your moral case against the draft? Obviously, you're a patriotic guy, and you're all about the Declaration of Independence and all the America's founding traditions and all those things. You don't think people should have to serve their country?
Well, I don't think you can serve your country if you succumb to slavery. You could say, well, yeah, we need you to be a slave and work in this plant to manufacture products we need. Obviously, slavery doesn't enhance your country, and it can't be patriotic, and that's the same way it was with the draft. I start with the basic principle that our lives come to us in a natural or God-given way, and we have a right to our life and to our liberty, and the government should be very limited to protect that life and liberty. And the responsibility on how this life is being used is yours alone, as long as you don't hurt other people. So it's a moral principle. And secondarily to that, I think it's so impractical. It causes people to go to war when they shouldn't go to war. It's economically a disaster. So there's all these other ones. But the basic argument is each and every one of us have a right to our life, and we should not be controlled by our government and told what we can do or can't do. But I would use that same argument to the right of your income, too. I think it's a moral principle that your income is an extension of your life, your blood, your sweat, and your energy. Therefore, the government doesn't have a right to your income either, because that is, in a way, a form of slavery, too.
All right, now I'd like to ask you about Iraq. Various reports have it, at least, that President Obama means to stick by his plan to get the combat forces, although the definition of that seems a bit flexible, out of Iraq in 16 months. And I'm not sure if you've been keeping up with Gareth Porter's work at IPS, but certainly the Washington Post and other places have covered General Odirno's and General Petraeus's pretty obvious attempt to try to spin this, that they've warned us that if we don't stay for at least 23 months, then things will go bad, and it will be kind of the Vietnam stab in the back all over again, and seems to be bordering on outright insubordination on behalf of General Petraeus there. I wonder if you can comment, sir.
Well, as a matter of fact, Gareth Porter was in my office this week, and we did talk about this. I don't think there's any chance in the world that the troops will be out of Iraq in 1, 2, or even 3 years. And you implied that they might change the name, the active personnel versus somebody just sitting there. But they're not going to close that embassy down, and that's an affront to the people. What about those 12 or 15 bases that they have there? We're not going to leave those. And if there's more violence next week, I think more troops would be sent over there. And I think it's a whole farce to think that all of a sudden we're going to leave after all this investment in time of energy to protect these oil companies' interests over there.
And you think that really is the root of the policy in Iraq, is basically the same as Afghanistan, is mostly about controlling that oil?
Yeah, probably more so in Iraq. Afghanistan doesn't have the it was more geography there of transportation.
Right.
But yeah, I think definitely Iraq was involved, and I think you can't argue that Israel doesn't have something to say about this as well. I mean, there's very, very loyal dedication to whatever Israel wants in the Congress, and many members of Congress, even though they know it might be the right thing to do, wouldn't take a certain vote if they thought this was construed as being anti-Israel. I think in terms of what's pro-American, what's best for America. And when people say, well, your position doesn't sound like it's pro-Israel, I said, well, I'd take all the funds away from all those Arab nations, too. I wouldn't be sending weapons over there to Arab nations. I wouldn't be propping up enemies of Israel either. So I just think the non-interventionist foreign policy serves our interest best, but it serves the interests of all our friends and all our potential enemies as well. And I think the world would all be much more peaceful for it.